Hey everyone, welcome to Talking Leadership. Thanks again for joining me, and it's a great time to launch a third part of the podcast series that I'm putting together. So what I now have in terms of podcast offerings around leadership content will be Talking Leadership Emerging Leaders, and now Talking Leadership Australian Entrepreneurs. My first guest on today's program is currently working as the Director and Principal Consultant of Alex Thomas Proprietary Limited. Fantastic discussion with a somewhat reluctant entrepreneur, a accidental entrepreneur, as Alex puts it. Hope you enjoyed, and more content to come. So, kind of welcome to the podcast, Alex Thomas, FGLF. How are you, mate?
Very well, thank you, Eric. Nice to be here.
Excellent. So for those listening, they're going to want to know what FGLF stands for. Can you give us a bit of a background, please?
Well, FGLF stands for Fellow of the Governor's Leadership Foundation. So it's a 12-month program that's facilitated down here in South Australia, and the Governor of South Australia is the patron. And it's heavily orientated around adaptive leadership theory and understanding complex social challenges in South Australia and sort of immersing yourselves in them.
How did you get into the program?
Yeah. So essentially the program takes in around 40 to 44 people per year. I was really fortunate to have got a scholarship to get into it through Primary Industries and Regions of SA. Thanks, guys. Because I don't know if I otherwise would have been able to do it as a self-employed person. But yeah, there's a robust interview process, and yeah, it was incredible. It was easily the best program I think I've ever done from a leadership sort of training perspective.
Well, there you go. That's a good plug for the program. So those listening, if you're in South Australia, you need to get onto that course. So new set of questions for this particular podcast, Alex. First questions first. What was your pathway to becoming an entrepreneur?
I've had to think about this, and I've never really considered myself an entrepreneur until I spoke to you last week. So I'm going to classify myself as an accidental entrepreneur for the sake of the exercise, because the choices that I've made along my journey certainly haven't been made, sort of with that lens attached to it. I guess if we take it right back, the pathway has been long and meandering, as it is for anyone at any given point in time. But I grew up on a sheep station in South Australia's northeast pastoral, very, very dry part of the world. Had an incredibly idyllic childhood, did school of the air until I was about 12, went to boarding school, hated my parents for it. We copped a series of really rough droughts, and throughout that my dad contracted this awful thing called Q fever, which you get from working with various forms of livestock, and the pressure of the drought and then divorce and then having to sell the station meant that he was then diagnosed with diabetes, heart failure and kidney failure. So the poor bugger's been very unwell for a very long time. He's been disabled since he was about 56, and I've played a key role in looking after him since I was around 15. I guess that was a huge milestone in informing the trajectory that I've taken since I was a young woman. So after having to sell the station and I was an aspiring pastoralist, I guess, throughout my childhood, Dad and I went to the mining industry and, sort of somewhat reinvented ourselves. And it was there I fell into health and safety, or work health and safety. And there weren't many roles around for women on the land, and there certainly weren't that many in mining either. But that's just what sort of happened. And I guess, at the same time as watching Dad's health deteriorate, desperately wanting to be in ag or some related industry, my career progressed in mining. And when the GFC happened and everything sort of fell by the wayside in mining, I saw an opportunity to start up a business when I was about 21 as a contractor as a work health and safety consultant for multiple contractors on a particular mine site. So I guess that was the first sort of entrepreneurial brain fart that I had. After that, I ended up coming down to Adelaide and doing some stuff in the corporate space for that particular mining company. And then the South Australian mining industry fell over, so I went to Western Australia, and then eventually that fell over. And then I thought, well, bugger it. I think maybe now's the time to re-enter into ag. Maybe I'll try my hand working in the fishing industry in Port Lincoln. And that's been amazing. That was in 2013. And I guess, probably one of the biggest lessons from that time was that although I'd been doing work health and safety for, 6 or 7 years at that point, and I thought I knew what I was talking about, I certainly didn't understand what it meant for an industry like fishing, which is dominated by small family businesses. And I certainly didn't really know my craft as well as I thought I did. So in the midst of kind of getting lots of, and I guess further to that, work health and safety wasn't really ripe as a topic within that industry at that point either. So eternally frustrated, I thought, bugger it, I'm going to go to Norway, see if I can get some more street credibility and just, find out some more about what good work health and safety looks like in the context of fishing. Found out some things, very anecdotal research, given I'm not a researcher. Came back to Port Lincoln and, that kicked off a chain reaction of other work in the sort of safety fishing ag space thereafter.
Thank you for sharing that, mate. So the pathway to becoming an entrepreneur now, that, like you said, it can be shaped by your life circumstances. So one of the reasons for doing this podcast, and again, I'm going to be very interested to hear your thinking here. What do you think is the differences, if any, between leaders, for want of a better term, and entrepreneurs?
It's such a good question. And I guess I can only answer based on my own experience, and I guess from some of the fantastic sort of resources and mentors that I've had the privilege of leveraging off of throughout the journey. But in my experience, I think a leader has the capacity to influence people towards either a prescribed or a non-prescribed outcome by engaging and empowering them. Whereas I think an entrepreneur is, I'm a lone ranger, can be a bit of a lone ranger, and is perhaps more fixated on achieving a certain goal rather than bringing people on a journey. So I think a leader can be an entrepreneur, you can be both. But you can also not be as well, if that makes sense.
In your travels, when you're meeting other people that you might, and I hate to use the word, but label entrepreneur, do you think that you, as part of that group, if you'll allow me a little latitude here, as an accidental entrepreneur, that there's a set of definable differences that make you stand out amongst leaders or managers? I guess to broaden it out a bit, would you say, in your circumstance, you're a bigger risk taker, you're more persistent? Is there a set of those things that you see from your fellow entrepreneurs around the place?
I think risk taking is definitely a part of it, but I think it's also just being infatuated with recognizing opportunities for improvement. It's almost like an unreconcilable dissatisfaction with the status quo as well, and the desire to sort of respond to the environment that you're in, if that makes sense.
In your travels and your experience, what's the most difficult part about being an entrepreneur?
It's interesting. I don't think I'm in an entrepreneurial mindset all the time. I think it's I have epic brain farts every now and again, and I think, wow, that's so cool. And then I slip back into some form of normality and just kind of get on with it. But when I'm in that space of being really creative and innovative and just terrorizing everybody around me, the excitement wears off and you're chasing that, whatever that thing is. There's the lack of security and stability that comes with it, and there's a feeling of being a bit isolated. Having been self-employed for such a long time now, it kind of fades. But I certainly remember lots of having these huge goals and big visions of improving health and safety in the fishing industry, period. And people will be like, that's too big. It's too big a goal. You can't do that. Make it more tangible. And because I work in health and safety in the sort of social space, as you know, social impact's really difficult to measure.
So given what you've just said, how do you measure success?
It's certainly not driven by dollars, and my bank account can attest to that, which is, when I did Google entrepreneur, it said something about financial goals, and I was like, no, that's not me. So I think I've learned, and I think it's different now to what it was when I was younger and probably more insecure. But these days, it's just about feeling good. If it feels good, and hopefully it's made other people feel good in the process, that means it's aligned with my values. And I think that's what being successful means to me.
What do you believe are the most critical capabilities needed by entrepreneurs?
Critical capabilities needed by entrepreneurs. Yeah. Okay. So it's definitely about communication. And I think, coming out of corporate mining, certain view of the world, then going and working with fishing, even though I had rural roots and I thought that would definitely give me instant credibility, which it definitely did not. I realised pretty quickly that I was talking a completely different language. In fact, then going and working with farmers, I was all technical speak, and I thought, all of my stuff was just immaculate, and it kind of was, but it kind of didn't make sense to anyone, so it didn't really matter. Yep, definitely communication and language, and the part of that is being agile and responsive to the environment that you're in. I think they're the things that you really need.
Alex, just wanted to get your thoughts on a couple of statements here. The first one being entrepreneurs are risk takers.
Yes, 100%.
Okay. Can I ask you to unpack that a bit?
Sure. Like, I guess if I can use, like, Dad's my sounding board, and he's ultra conservative rural bloke. And he's like, oh, every time I'm like, oh, I'm going to start a business, he's like, oh, don't do that. And then, or how much money have you got in the bank? And it just doesn't really even occur to me that I should be thinking terribly hard about that, which is, rightly or wrongly, that's just how my brain works.
That's fine. Entrepreneurs are persistent.
Yes, absolutely they are. But I think one thing that you have to be mindful of, or I've had to learn to be mindful of in that sense, is that you have to also give yourself permission to sit and just let things settle, and so you can get clearer. Because being persistent sometimes is like banging your head against a brick wall, and that doesn't always have the desired outcome.
Entrepreneurs are innovators.
Not necessarily, but sometimes I think entrepreneurs can hire innovators. So it depends whether you're talking about it in an individual context or in a group context. And also I think entrepreneurs can be, kind of right place, right time, rather than developing a new thing for, like, new and different, improved thing for a challenge or a need.
Entrepreneurs are strategic thinkers.
Strategic thinking is definitely a part of being an entrepreneur, but it's not everything.
Do you find yourself in a strategic frame of mind? And by that I mean by thinking about what are the big macro issues of what you're trying to do, or do you just get in and start doing and then sort of work your way out from that?
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that, because I walked myself through my own strategic planning earlier this year and kind of looked at the words on this piece of paper I'd been given about how to do a strategic plan, and I was like, oh, I kind of get it, but I kind of don't. And, it'd come from some, one of those people that talks a language that I don't understand. But but what I did settle on was a few big ideas big goals that I wanted to achieve, and then I operationalized them. So I guess if you call that strategic thinking, then sure. But am I doing that on a day-to-day basis? Probably not. I'm just being agile and working with what I've got.
So here's the last one. Entrepreneurs users of foresight.
I would say, from my experience, no, not really. Because I think sometimes I've gotten confused around what I think things should be with the expert. And with that, when you think something is going to be a certain way, you expect that people are going to be in a certain headspace as well. And that's not always correct. So for example, like if my foresight was 10 years ago that work health and safety was going to be a big thing in fishing and ag, well, I was kind of wrong. I definitely was wrong. In fact, the issue just isn't right. So do I use foresight? No, I use intuition, I suppose, to feel my way along.
How does an entrepreneur look at mentoring, and has that been important for you?
It's really interesting, because I think some of the hardest yards I did, we talked about what some of the challenging things are in terms of being an entrepreneur. I was in full isolation, like in a rural, not quite ISO the way we know it now, but like in a regional centre, and there just wasn't really the availability of people with really good mentoring skills, or people that I thought would be the right sort of match with me. However, having said that, from a leadership perspective, I've had some fantastic mentors in more recent years. We've found each other organically rather than it being a search and destroy type mission. And those people who I still have are from all different walks of life and different backgrounds and whatever else. And the presiding qualities that they have are that they're objective, they're trustworthy, they're compassionate, they're altruistic about the relationship we have. And it's never really about prescribing. It's about guiding me back to whatever my own inner wisdom is telling me already.
The degree of formality of those relationships, would you say they're all informal relationships or more formal networking? So did you, as Alex, go out and say, hey, Joe Bloggs, I'd like you to be my mentor, and this is how many times a week we're going to talk, like a formal type thing? Or was it more you've developed relationships with some people that in other industries or that are more senior than you in this space that you said, yeah, I'd like to keep having conversations with you? Is that how that panned out?
Gosh, Varied. The one I'm thinking of does actually mentor. She's paid by certain individuals to mentor her mentees, but we met through a mutual friend, and she said, I would love to be your mentor and I'm not going to charge you. And we just kicked it off really, really well. And we caught up, we tried to catch up relatively frequently. So, once every 6 weeks or something like that to keep some momentum. But other than that, and other than, making a commitment to confidentiality and stuff like that right at the beginning, it was relatively informal and very, very supportive, safe sort of environment to discuss certain things in. And I think we were just meant to connect. I don't think anyone could have, matched us up in any other way or anything like that.
Last question I've got, and I'm really interested in your response to this one. Entrepreneurs are born, not made.
Like I said, I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I don't even know if I don't even know what that really means, to be honest. And I don't think it's up to me to impose a certain view of whether they're born or made onto other people, because I would hate for anyone to think that they couldn't do it because of something that I said.
Okay, so from your experiences and from the people you've seen out in the world, do you think it's more likely that anyone can become an entrepreneur, or that in some circumstances, some people you've met in your travels they were born to do their own thing and be successful? It wouldn't have mattered what happened in any other circumstance. They were going to be that person that you go, hey, hang on, you went to grade 12 and now you run a multi-billion-dollar business. How the hell did that happen? Like, have you met people like this? That's more why I'm asking, not necessarily, well, according to Alex Thomas, this is exact. You know what I mean? Like the people you've met in your life as a leader.
I think it can be either or. I think from a spiritual perspective, I think there's probably something in it around, finding a higher purpose and stuff like that. But that's based on my own experience. I mean, it's interesting. I went to a workshop the other day and Elizabeth Gilbert was talking about how everybody talks about finding your why. You've got to go and find your why, and then you can become an entrepreneur or you can do whatever. And then the interesting thing was, I'd been to a conference the week before that was hammering that same message. But Elizabeth Gilbert said it's actually an assault on humankind to say, go and find your why. Go and meditate, go and sit down for a few hours and drink some chai latte, and it'll just come to you, because it's so not like that at all, I think. So yes, I think it's a bit of both.
Once again, I'd like to thank Alex for her time. Fantastic inaugural podcast. A lot more content coming under the Australian Entrepreneur podcast banner. Thanks again for your support of the podcast. So look, if you want to get better acquainted with the topic area of leadership, and particularly the experiences of some fantastic leaders across the country, all you've got to do is go to two of the following sites. So you can go to YouTube, type in the search area, Talking Leadership. So you'll find 60 odd podcasts available for your listening pleasure, with, again, leaders from across the Australian industry and not-for-profit divide. Fantastic group of people, and again, I'd like to thank you all for chatting with me and talking about your leadership pathways. And again, I'll be adding a lot more content in this area, and today's podcast is the first of many, I hope, under that Australian Entrepreneur banner. Again, thanks for your time, and I'll catch everyone on the next podcast.